And now, an Arizona PBS original production.
The School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership presents the Civic Discourse Project, Citizenship and Civic Leadership in America, this week.
I think at the end of the day, we're doing a disservice to people when we decide that to put politics over a country or politics over a state.
If you're starting in a position of wanting somebody to cave on all their principles, you're just not going to get anything done, and I think that's the mistake that some folks make.
The Civic Discourse Project is brought to you by Arizona State University's School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. Now, Sarah Elliott from the Impact Project and Governor Doug Ducey's Chief of Staff, Daniel Scarpinato, sit down to discuss the 2018 gubernatorial campaign and current political climate with your host, Paul Carisse, and co-moderator Maria Poletta from the Arizona Republic.
And I want to step back a little bit just to observe the phenomenon we have here. And to share with the audience that the idea for this event largely came from the two of you having conversations after the campaign and becoming friends of a sort. And I would use the phrase civic friends, right? That you clearly have strong philosophical and party disagreements, which are not phony, they're quite real. But you share something, a certain set of commitments about this process of elections and the importance of public issues. So just talk, if you would, about this phenomenon that you can be really fierce opponents in a campaign and beyond a campaign about important issues, and yet you can be civic friends and decent and civil toward each other, because not everybody in American political life now thinks that this is how you should operate if you really do believe your side or your point of view. So,
Let me take that one first.
Sure.
All right. Well, I do think in the era of Trump and polarizing politics, it's certainly gotten harder for people to have a civil discourse about issues. Our particular relationship, we absolutely disagree, obviously, on all kinds of things. But we also share a lot of values. You know, we come from very similar backgrounds, and I think at the end of the day, we're doing a disservice to people when we decide that to put politics over a country or politics over a state, right? And that's very difficult to not do in this environment, because I think certainly people on the Democratic side, and even cutting into wide swaths of independents right now, are very unhappy with the polarization of politics. And so it's been nice to have a relationship in which we can sort of agree to disagree, but I think our values are very similar. I think our approaches to getting there are very different. I think it's really important that we have people who continue this kind of discourse as a result of, particularly as a result of the environment now and the landscape now. We've long lost most of the statesmen or stateswomen in politics.
How was your relationship during the campaign? Or on the campaign trail?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I have two examples, very good examples, of Daniel being very kind to me during the campaign, and I think he probably has a few too. Certainly, we are both very competitive, and so. But it's not about us. At the end of the day, it's not about us, right? It's about our candidates' policies, our candidates' belief in communicating those, and letting voters decide, who they want in office. And he and I are both, I think, professionals. We've done this a long time, and recognize it's not about us. I mean, we didn't spend all day tweeting back and forth at each other like some people like to do. And when we see each other at public events, it was perfectly kind and normal human behavior, I guess. But I think we're both, again, we come from similar backgrounds, and we're both polite and believe in treating people the way we'd like to be treated.
Well, we're both former reporters. We've both worked in governor's offices and on governor's campaigns and on a lot of campaigns. Most of the campaigns I've worked on have lost. So, I know the experience of both ends of the spectrum. And I also really, watched Sarah, how she conducted herself, and she was clearly a great professional communicator. And I just couldn't wait after the campaign to sit down with her and say, you know, what did you think on debate night? And what did you do on this thing? And when we did this and da-da-da. So, I mean, I was just really curious to hear from her, her take on stuff, what was happening, and I think it was mutual. So it was just a lot of fun, and it's been really good getting to know each other, because she's right, we do have very similar backgrounds, very similar professional backgrounds that, you know, I think have allowed us to learn from each other.
Sarah, you talked about sort of the polarized environment that we're in right now, and we've certainly heard complaints. I mean, that's part of the reason we have events like this, is that we hear from voters, both on the campaign trail, I'm sure, and in the media, how frustrated they are with how divided the nation is right now. However, we also see that, you know, the negative attack ads that they complain about tend to be effective and tend to be what they remember and what they pay attention to. So I'm curious how you, whether it was in this race or others, as you know, communications professionals, navigate that when you're on the campaign trail, that sort of discrepancy or conflict between what voters say they want and what it seems like they want in practice.
Sure, I would have two things to say about that. One, I think largely in this environment, we have stopped giving voters things to vote for. Right, which is really what I believe politics and governing should ultimately be about. We are now giving people things to vote against, or perceived things to vote against. Clearly, the RGA ads, Republican Governors Association ads against David, I found personally extremely offensive. They were ranked one of the top racist ads in the country, but they were really effective. So at the end of the day, you know, when you're making decisions, and, you know, let's not get this wrong, politics is about winning, so you can govern. You know, the sides have to do what they do.
So, again, respect, Sarah. Really, totally couldn't disagree more on this. I mean,
really?
Now it's going to get fun.
We are incredibly proud of the campaign we ran. Don't forget, the governor had a lot of support from Democrats, from Democratic mayors. Mario Diaz, who had run Janet Napolitano's campaign, worked on our campaign. We did huge outreach into the Hispanic community. We got the endorsement of both of the two major newspapers in the state, including the Arizona Daily Star, my former employer, and I can tell you from working there, it's pretty hard for a Republican to get the endorsement of the Arizona Daily Star. So I think that we had a positive, winning message that resonated. And again, I've worked on a lot of campaigns that have not been successful. I think saying it's all about money is what people who don't win say. I think the fact is Sarah touched on it, David did make some policy decisions and take some policy stances in his primary. I don't think that $20 million could have gotten him elected. So I do think it was about policy. I think it was a real policy debate, and a more animated and spirited policy debate than any that I have seen in a gubernatorial race in my whole life in Arizona.
I know losing campaigns blame it on money, I mean, obviously, right? But, you know, had we had money, Governor Ducey made a lot of mistakes. You know, we came out of the primary essentially tied. I don't disagree necessarily that some of those positions hurt us, but I think in the face of family separations and what was going on at the time, it felt morally important for us to say something.
I wanted to ask a quick follow-up question before I get to my main question, because you talked about running center-right, but something that Governor Ducey had to contend with was sort of walking a line when you had a fragmented Republican Party, where you had folks, at least in Arizona, who were more of the John McCain type Republican, and then you had others who were very pro-Trump. You also had Senator McCain pass away right around the time of the primary. So how did the governor during his re-election campaign, or you all as his team, navigate that when you had some splinters within your own party? Yeah,
well, it's a really good question. I do think that in federal races, this is much more challenging. I mean, we really tried to stick to our job, as the governor says, his day job here in the state of Arizona. The other thing the governor always says is you never see two governors on a split screen on cable news. I mean, governors, there is a congeniality between governors. I just think it's a very different job than being a senator or a congressman. So we felt like the issue set that we got done in the first term really was one that had a broad appeal. And we also felt that we were able to really build some relationships with Democrats and get things done with Democrats that was positive, but didn't alienate anyone. We never compromised our principles. And then right out the gate after, and Paul, this might go to your question, I mean, the first thing we did after the election was go into legislative session and pass a major water bill, first in 40 years, unanimous on the most controversial political issue, some would say, in the state. And we did it with the help of Democrats, and we brought them in early. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we didn't feel in any way compromised. We didn't feel that we were getting caught in that debate, because we really felt we could go in any room in the state and the governor could say, here's what I'm doing. And it was just a winning agenda and a winning message.
You mentioned another example of governing after an election, the regional water compromise and the specific legislation that Arizona had to pass as part of that sort of federal compact. And I again come back to this question: is it fair to say that governing is about forging compromises within party coalitions, then across party coalitions, and how difficult is it to do that if a median? You're saying most people who self-identify as Republican or Democrat are watching news, but the news, the television news, and I guess talk radio is very polarizing. How does that make it difficult to actually govern and compromise if the voters you're trying to communicate with are hearing very polarized messages, not from your campaigns, but from news sources?
Well, I mean, having been in a governor's office just like Daniel for a long time, there's no question that you are calling down members of the other party to get deals done, right? You cannot, I mean, we're in a red trifecta, so it's slightly different for you, although there's some problematic legislators on your side that I assume from time to time you have to make deals with. In Montana, we were a Democratic governor, although Democrats look very different there, with a Republican legislature, and we managed to pass full-time kindergarten, a renewable portfolio standard, Indian education for all, bison hunting, wolf hunting, all kinds of things that were compromises, because we were willing to sort of both give and take a little. And I think good governing does that. Good governing, once you're elected, should do the best for the greatest number, right? You shouldn't govern from a position of complete ideology. You should govern from a position of sort of making deals and moving toward the middle a little bit. Now, that's impossible completely to do, nor should you completely do it, because you got elected to do what you say you're going to do. But I think there's no way to be an effective governor and not make some compromises. There just isn't.
I think that's right. I mean, we have 31 of 60 seats in the House and 17 of 30 in the Senate. So it's not like we've got super majorities in the Arizona legislature. And so we do work with the other side. And we have great relationships with the Democratic leaders and with Democratic members. And I talked about the water legislation, and some of the members of our team who actually got the policy done and negotiated are here. They deserve the credit. But I wish people could have seen it. I almost wish we could have live streamed it, although then it may have gone differently. But
that's my point in part, right?
We had in the 8th floor conference room of the governor's office, the governor, Charlene Fernandez, the Democratic leader in the House, Rusty Bowers, Speaker of the House, David Bradley, Senate Democratic leader, and Karen Fann, the President of the Senate, in the room all day on a Saturday, talking through issues, negotiating in the room, saying, I'll give up this, I'll give your members that. because they saw the importance of getting that done and what it meant for the state. So to me, it was a very inspiring moment where a job like this is very gratifying, because you see that and you realize, well, we have great people in elected office that care, that are willing to do the right thing, and that actually can, this can happen. And I think it happens more at the state level than at the federal level.
I know you can't really reveal, all the specifics of what happens behind the scenes, but is there more compromise happening than the public sees? Because, we're hearing from you, Governor, and we hear from the Governor, open door policy, bringing in Democratic legislators, and then we hear from Democrats, we've been shut out, we're not getting a say, there's back and forth, like you mentioned, between Republican lawmakers within the same party. So, in terms of the public having hope in the process, with state and local politics, is there more compromise happening than maybe some of the posturing would lead the public to believe?
Well, I don't know if I'd use the word compromise so much as open dialogue. I don't feel like anyone is compromising their sincerely held philosophical beliefs, and nor should they. If you're starting in a position of wanting somebody to cave on all their principles, you're just not going to get anything done, and I think that's the mistake that some folks make. If you're willing to say, okay, here's an issue where we can appeal to the other side, where there is an opportunity, then I think you can find those opportunities, and it does happen. And I think that, most of the legislation we pass is bipartisan, and some of the big issues, the Opioid Act, the water legislation, have been bipartisan, and it's really, we couldn't have gotten that done if we hadn't brought everyone in and said, how can we do this together? The teacher pay raise was also bipartisan. And so really any good thing, any big thing we've done has largely been done through Republicans and Democrats working together.
We're in a university setting, so I want to ask you a difficult question about the voters you would prefer to have. This is just between us. Be honest with us. So we're educators here. At Arizona State University, we do think about helping the debate in this state and beyond about civic education, especially public school civic education, to prepare people to be informed, capable, and participating citizens. So what are we doing wrong in schools, and what are we doing wrong in universities? Be honest, what kind of voters would you really like to have out there to communicate with in campaigns, or are they just perfect, the voters out there? They don't need to be any more informed or engaged or anything like that.
Well, I'll go back to my first point, which is just, I think it's incumbent on us to start giving voters things to vote for again, largely. We're creating this environment of cynicism to some extent, but, we're certainly seeing a lot of young, more diverse voters coming into our party, and we'll take them.
Well, I would say I want more voters, more people voting, more people engaged. I think the thing that's great about this school is the focus on civil discourse, and the focus on civics. I think more people knowing about our history. These are all issues that the governor cares a lot about, of making sure that kids understand history, understand our founding principles, and are civically engaged. I think that the folks, many of them who are here who helped us win, were ASU students, young people who got involved in the campaign.
Should we be doing more particularly on the question of digital age media literacy? We talked a bit about ads or information that one campaign might think is inaccurate, unfair, but there's a national debate about false information, easily detectable, fraudulent information. Do we in schools and in universities need to spend a little bit more time about that, which could make things difficult for not campaigns maybe, but for third-party sources of information? Or is that just noise for you? You don't really worry about that
I mean, I think you should spend some time on it. I mean, I think part of what we're both saying is, you want a young electorate or young people to look at all of these issues and make up their own mind about what's best for their future, right? And that takes some education around misleading advertising. It takes some education around policy issues. It takes some education around what it means to be, I think more and more of us are like, what does it mean to be a Republican or a Democrat or an independent? Because the parties both have brought, our party certainly has started to, the Republican Party has for a long time had these sort of broader extremes on either side, and I think most of us fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. So I think educating young people about that and about, Facebook and some of those things are starting to really emerge as potentially, I think, dangerous to our democracy. So I do think that's an important point to make.
I think the voters are smarter than we sometimes give them credit for, having sat through hours and hours of focus groups over the last decade plus. I will tell you that people know something is phony when they see it, and that stuff usually doesn't work. So I think the voters can tell this stuff. I think that the media is really important. And one thing, not to put her on the spot, but I've given Maria credit for this before, is I have no idea what her views are. I have no idea who she wanted to win our campaign, but she covered it. And she doesn't share her views on the Twitter sphere. That isn't true for everyone anymore in the media. And I do think the media are the referees. They should be the referees calling the balls and strikes, and I think we need more of that, and we need that trust in the media to be telling the story and to be doing it in a way where people say, okay, that's objective, and I can believe that.
I think it's absolutely essential to be teaching media literacy, if I can jump in. One thing I wanted to mention but didn't want to interrupt, Daniel talked about the Arizona Republic endorsing Governor Ducey for re-election. The editorial board is completely separate from what I do, which is on the reporting side, and not everybody understands the distinction. I take heat for some of the opinion columns that come out that I, have no idea what they're going to say until until everybody else does. And so I think it's really critical to democracy, not to put too fine a point on it, that people can tell the difference, not so much with ads, but with news, what's actually fair, what's objective. I don't know if there's such a thing as absolutely no bias, because as a reporter, you're making decisions every step along the way, right? What do you cover? Who do you talk to? Which quotes do you include? That sort of thing. But objectivity you can definitely have, and recognizing that, I think, is critical among voters.
Great. That was much more interesting than anything they had to say.
Hey, now.
That was really very good.
You've got your next speaker.
There we go.
Event.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say, as chairman here at ASU, the Young Democrats and College Republicans have a great bipartisan relationship. But as I'm sure we all know, that's not the national model. So I'm curious, in your opinions, what steps do we need to take as a society or a nation in that matter to get closer to what we have here at ASU?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. Do you mind if I take that first? Part of it is recognizing what we talked about earlier. There's the campaign and there's governing. In a campaign, you put on your jersey. And we wouldn't disparage each other for supporting Democrats or Republicans. It's then what comes next. Our opponent in our first campaign, the governor's first campaign, was Fred Duvall. He is now on the Arizona Board of Regents. The governor appointed him to the Arizona Board of Regents. He worked in Bruce Babbitt's administration. He's been a Democrat for decades, and he's a great guy, and we've got some real shared priorities around higher ed and some of these other issues. So I think it's recognizing that, hey, guess what? In the campaign, the college Republicans are going to be doing everything they can to get Republicans elected, but at the end of the day, it's not personal that we disagree.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's exactly right. Engage on engage on values, right? Like, issues divide and values unite, right? At the end of the day, I think a lot of us believe, our kids should have a good education. People should have access to health care. Those kinds of things we certainly don't disagree on. We disagree on how to get there, I think, or what that model might look like. But I think engaging with each other on the real questions and problems of our time and talking about how you might solve them, working together would be a huge step in the right direction.
Thank you all for participating in the Civic Discourse Project, which airs regularly on Arizona PBS. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we hope you will listen to our school's podcast called Keeping It Civil, which you can find on iTunes and Podbean and any place you find podcasts. And in the podcast, we feature in-depth conversations with the speakers we have in the Civic Discourse Project. So on behalf of Arizona State University and my colleagues in the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, and our special guest tonight, thank you and good night.
The Civic Discourse Project, Citizenship and Civic Leadership in America, is brought to you by Arizona State University's School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law.